Alright, now in this particular tutorial, a lot of people aren't going to want to follow these steps. This is going to be creating your own lines and rivets. And for the NGX, it's probably not needed, but for a lot of paints out there, a lot of paint kits, and a lot of kits that don't exist to where you're creating your own kit, this step is very important. So in a later tutorial, I'm going to have a tutorial for creating your own paint kit, and this step is essential. And not only that, but this is going to, even if you're not interested in this, that's fine. This video should still be watched because it's going to show you a lot of techniques to where will come in handy, I'm sure, for you in the future. Now, before I get started, the end of the last video, I had changed my shapes or my effects. And after zooming them, or after making that logo smaller, I saw that the better contour for what I wanted wasn't what we had chosen. So I did change that. So if you are following along, I did change it from, I think we had this to this. And that's all. So I changed those for all my different logos for my winglets. And let's now get into this. I'm going to press F twice, get into full screen here. And first of all, we're going to be working in doing our rivets, and the current rivets and lines are on your rivets and paneling layer. Let's check that by toggling it off and on, and you can see there is another layer actually at work here, and that is in your weathering. So the benefit for doing these rivets all by hand, well, by having them on your own layers, and I say layers as in plural, meaning more than one, because you have much more control that way, should you want to add wear and tear later. I don't want to damage the existing ones, but I don't like how light they are. And if we look right now, we see the opacity is already at 100%, so we can't really, crank that up more, but we can make it darker. Even if you change the blending mode from multiply to normal, or even darken, you're not going to really be changing that layer. So I'll set it back to multiply. So if all you want to do is darken these, what you could do is you could duplicate the layer. So I'm going to duplicate that a few times, Control J, and we're getting darker, 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 darker. I'm going to go really high here. And that's good. And I'm going to go ahead back down to the original, and I'm going to shut it off. I don't want to touch it. I want to keep a backup of it. And you could even name it backup if you want. I'm going to now click on the bottom one here, go up to my very top one, and hold down Shift and click it. And merge these together by pressing Control E. And now I have this very dark, too dark set of rivets and lines. So what I'm going to do now, or what I can do now, is in the future, if I want to turn this down, the visibility down, to get the desired result, I could just change the opacity. Alright? But let's go ahead and crank that back up to 100. Or actually, I'm going to go ahead and go back to the original, shut mine off. And I'm going to go down here, zoom way in, and let's look at the actual rivets and lines. And let's look at why I decided, or one reason I decided to create my own. Well, there were a couple things that I wanted to correct, and one of them being the lines. Like around here, if you see these lines here, they're straight in the paint, but actually once they're wrapped on the fuselage, they're curved toward the top. And that's, just one of the things that I wanted to fix. So one thing I want to show you is I want to start introducing other shortcuts to you now that I don't want to say everything all at once. If I were to start off this tutorial series and just constantly say, okay, I'm going to press F for this and Control minus for this, and so on and so on and so on, you're not going to be grabbing anything at all because it's going to be so much, it's going to be too much information all at once. So I think we've gone on long enough to where you probably got a good grab, a good hold on some of these things. So I'm going to start to do things a little differently, and hopefully you'll retain it more now. So one thing you can do is you can switch between images without having to press F to get out of it. And to do so, I'm going to go ahead and now switch to my other layer, or my other image that has all my lines and rivets, and that would be with Control Tab. And there we go. That way now I don't have to get out of it and go into it. So actually what I want to do here is I'm going to go ahead and match the zoom to this one here. So I'm going to say Arrange, Match Zoom, and all I want to do is get these roughly around the same spot and go back into full here. And now when I toggle back and forth, we kind of get a good look at where the lines are. Now, if you look at these lines here, these lines are straight, like I was showing you a minute ago. And then if you look at mine are curved. Now, this brings up a key point. And again, anybody can correct anything anybody else has ever done. Somebody can take my rivets here and just totally make something really great out of them, and that would be great. I'd be happy. So what I want to point out here is you have what I call vortice pull or wrapper. Okay, people talk about the wrapper a lot, and other people don't know what that is. Well, think of the map in the globe, for instance. You have a map, and then when it gets onto a globe, it's kind of wrapped around that body of the globe, that sphere. All right, and the same thing with your paint. Your paint is going to be wrapped around, the fuselage. But there are certain pull zones to where it does things to your paint to where you're not going to like, and you are going to have to deal with that. Okay? Since the beginning of time, I see people really whining about, this isn't working and this isn't working, and this doesn't pertain to, everybody. A lot of new painters just are under misconceptions that everything's going to be perfect for them. It's not the case, and you really, really need to start using other paint kits, and you'll have a better respect for what you have. Anyway, without going into a huge discussion on that, certain areas get pulled. So on the existing lines, you'll see that they're straight. Okay, and I'm going to let me go ahead and turn my back on so you can see better. So you have the straight lines here, and then you have mine that are curved. And inside my box here, or right below my group rather, you have correction, guide, and we'll get into guides later. And all I did was back and forth, from my paint to, flattening it, bring it over to my other PSDs, put it into FSX, and trial by error I found this groove to work the best for me. And of course, that groove, or this set of lines, for right now, this is just 2 rows of rivets on the top and the bottom. But you might be dealing with a fancy design for your line or for your tail, and trying to match that up, and you're gonna have to work. Okay, there are a lot of things in here that, again, that you just have to work on, and you're going to have to go back and forth. So not knowing what paint you're doing or what paint kit you're doing and where its pull zones are, I just wanted to point this out because this is something that you really need to know and think about. So I'm going to go ahead and flip back to this one here, and I want to zoom in a little bit, let's say 100%. And looking at the lines and the rivets and everything else, you might look at it and say, oh my god, Dan, are you nuts? I'm not going to recreate all these rivets and lines. That's just stupid. Well, again, this is really about how perfect you want your paint. So looking at these rivets, you can tell that they're machined, and that's a great thing. If I was doing a smaller aircraft, they too would be machined, but I might want them a little more, done by hand. And here you see that we have rivets over this right here, which is fine, but you might want to choose to maybe grab your eraser tool later and just clean up certain spots. So first we have to think about different ways on creating our dots, and one of which, if you look at these right here and then you look at mine, you're going to notice that mine have spaces where they intersect. Okay, but I also created mine on their own individual layers. I have my vertical lines, which are the top and bottom. I have the horizontal lines, or I'm sorry, rivets, and of course they go left to right. And then I have my lines. And each one on its own layer gives me a lot of control in erasing rivets later without having to worry about the other one. For instance, right here, I can see that I missed one, okay? And I want to just kill it without having to worry about accidentally clipping another one. Well, that's no problem. I have the vertical line selected right, or vertical rivet selected right now. I can just go ahead and to this particular one and kill it. Alright, but now how do we create these? Well, what I did, or what I always pretty much do, is in creating my rivets, I try to do the best that I can with what they have. You know, what the original author has given me to work with. But there are certain times, even if you triplicate and quadruple, you know, the actual original, you're not going to be able to see them, you know, or they're so faded, or they don't even exist. They might have actually, you know, totally erased them out in certain areas. So you have to improvise. And for me, let me show you the original way to do this. I'm going to press B for my brush tool, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer. And let's say, just say rivets horizontal. And I'm going to go ahead and choose a black color. And let's go ahead and, I want to get down here further. I want to be able to see what I have to work with. So right now I have a 2 brush selected, a number 2, and that of course is the size of the brush. That would be number 3, a number 4, and I'm not seeing that and saying it, you know, I'm not seeing that and telling you exactly what the brush is by looking at it. I'm looking up here, brush size, bam. Alright, so let's say I want to copy these. I'm going to go ahead and do a rivet just like this one above it. I'm going to click for a number 5 there, reduce it with the left bracket key, number 4, reduce it, and maybe a number 3, and reduce it to a number 2, and finally a number 1. What I'm looking for here is I'm looking to match up the size, of course, but I also want to match up the overall effect. And we haven't applied the effects yet, so let's go ahead and apply the effect. Now, when I come up here and I go into, say, bevel emboss, which is what I want, I'm going to go ahead and set it to pillow emboss and leave the depth at 100, size at 5, shut off global lighting, and I'm going to change my contour around a bit. And it's kind of hard to see what I want here. So this one looks good. I like the cove deep, and what that's given me is it's given me that little bevel. I'm not concerned at all with the actual color fill. That right there, let's take that out of the equation. I'm looking at the size of my rivet in relation to what they have there. So let's grab this effect and let's put it on the originals. Alright, and again, you can see that same effect isn't doing anything to them rivets. Thus, another reason why I created my own. So I want to be able to see this bevel on every single rivet on that entire 900 length of that body. That's a pretty huge body. And right off the bat, with the existing rivets and paneling, I'm not getting anything from my effect. The color's too drawn out. So the only way I can do that is create my own. Alright, so now you see exactly why. Now, in comparison to my sizes here, 5 is just way too big. I want to keep the rivet spacing to be very close to what it is, if not exact. So the only options that I'm looking at right now is 1 being very close, but it doesn't quite have so much bevel. I'm going to zoom out here to 100%, and now I can get a better look at how I'm going to see it. And I'm thinking that a number 2 is the best, and you'll see why a little later. So I'm going to just go ahead and erase them. So I'm going to create a new image and leave the size, that's fine, and I'm going to just fill this in with my background color. Zoom in, and let's grab that brush again. So I'm going to increase this brush size to, let's say, 35. And I'm going to click, and there I have a rivet. Actually, I'm going to create a new layer and put that rivet on its own layer so I can put effects on it. And I'm going to do the same thing we did earlier. I'm going to do pillow emboss, leave that, global lighting off, and change my contour to cove. Okay. So now we can see that it does have that little pillow bevel to it. So what I could do is I could go ahead and trace, or however I'm doing it, and I could try to evenly space these, and or if I'm looking for that little bit of crooked look, do it so on, so on, so on. Or what I can do is, let me kill all of them. What I can do is duplicate that layer, and I can drag this over while holding shift, keeping it in line. Now dragging it, I'm not going to really get a good feel of that space. So rather than do that, I'm going to do it with the keyboard, holding shift and with the arrow keys, and count how many times. So let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That looks good. Control J. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Control J. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So getting started takes a long time, but real quick, let me show you another key point. Let's say I wanted to merge these two layers. Now both of these layers have effects on them. So if I merge that down, see what happens? That particular rivet now is part of this one. These two are now on the same layer, but this rivet has double the effect. All right, let me zoom in a little bit so you can see here. And if I was to merge these two into this one, now these two have doubled the effect. This one actually has tripled the effect. So this is one reason why you don't want to merge down. Okay, this is not a good idea to do. So I'm going to go ahead and undo this a few times here. Whoops, undo that like that. Now before you merge down, what you want to do is you want to shut the actual effect off for that particular layer, and then just merge that into it. And when you do that, it adapts to that one rather than duplicate it. And again, I'll shut this one off and merge it, shut this one off and merge it. So now I have all my dots or rivets on one layer, and they have the effects applied. Another easy way to do this is to just, before you duplicate them, shut the effect off. Now I can duplicate those and drag them over here. And actually I want to keep them aligned, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And merge them. And let's say duplicate them one more time, go the other way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And merge them. And now when I turn the effects on, of course, they are not harmed. So that's one key point I wanted to cover. But now let's talk about different ways to duplicate. If I'm creating rivets for an entire fuselage, now I'm going to have to sit there and do all these keyboard shortcuts or access the menu. There's another way to do it. If you have your movement tool selected, you can just click on the layer, hold down Alt, and you see that double arrow key again, or icon. Click, let go of Alt, press Shift to keep them aligned, and move them into position. And I'm going to move them overlapping so I can do my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And once again, shut off the effects for both of these, merge them, and I can continue all day long. I can now Alt-click these, move them to where they have to be, and do the same thing, and keep that going for however long I wanted to do it. All right? And the more that you make, the faster it is to make them, and you're going to be just creating, a whole fuselage full of rivets in no time. But there's still an easier way to do this, okay? Now let's learn a little bit about if I had existing rivets and I wanted to copy those. Okay, different way to do this without having to worry about merging them later. Well, I can go ahead and grab my marquee tool, and I could draw a selection around the rivets that I wanted to copy. And now if I click on the movement tool, I can hold down Alt, and now I'm moving. It'll collapse the selection around whatever you're moving from that layer. And now I can drag these wherever I want. But notice, it didn't create a new layer. Okay? It's not going to create a new layer at all because I'm actually selecting a portion of it from within that layer. So once I deselect this, it's all one layer again. But if I didn't, or as long as I don't have it deselected, I can move these and change them as much as I want. if later on down the road I'm working on something like, say, an alpha window, the alpha layer, just one little window, and I wanted to just move that, I can just draw a selection around it, hit the V for the movement tool, and now with my keyboard I'm just going to nudge this. And as soon as I start nudging, it collapses that selection and I can move it. And once again, you see over here in the layer that I'm still on that same layer. So this tip right here, I can't emphasize, how much of a time saver this is going to be for you. So deselect that, and once again, they're all part of that same layer. Now, let's say I wanted to turn a corner here. So I looked at it, I'm trying to line them up, and I see that I want 5 rivets. So I'm going to select 5 rivets. I'm going to switch to my movement tool, and I'm going to do that same thing. I'm going to just drag them out of here. But now I want to, say, come down from this point straight down. So what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and get this over it for now. Nudge this into position, and let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But now I want these to flip. So I'm going to hit Control T to get my transform selection tool. And when I try to rotate this, as I go to the outer edges again, you'll see that double arrow. And then I rotate it. But it's not rotating from the point that I wanted. I want it to rotate from here. So right here you'll see the anchor point. So if I had the anchor point over here and I were to rotate it, it's going to rotate from that anchor point. So I want it right dead center of this. So I'm going to go ahead and come over to it, and I'm going to click it, and I'm going to move it here. And right about there. And drag them down here. So if I hold down Shift while I do this, it will lock into that, perfect 90-degree area, or not necessarily 90, but it'll lock into all your major numbers here. See how it's doing that? And without Shift, it's not doing that. So keep that in mind. And now let's say I was zoomed out further and I had a much smaller selection, and let's say I wanted to move this anchor point. Right now you can see the fact that it's showing that little target underneath that cursor, or next to that cursor. Alright, showing that I can now grab this and move it. Alright, but let's say I didn't have that area and I couldn't select that. Well, you can press Alt, and when you press Alt, it's telling the cursor that you plan on moving that anchor point. So that's just another little tip to know. And I learned that very late in the game. And had I known that earlier, that would have been such a great thing. And I would have saved thousands of hours in Photoshop. Alright, so I'm going to deselect that. And once again, I made all these corrections while still on the same layer. I don't have to worry about merging things down the road. Turn my effects back on, and there we go. So I'm sure a lot of this isn't making sense right now, and you really are going to have to just play around with it yourself, but come back to this video, and even if it's just for that one key concept. Alright, so what else can we do with this? What else can we do with our rivets, or our different moving techniques? Well, right now, doing this method is fine, and this comes in really handy in many cases, and you might even want to do your total fuselage rivets like that. I do many times, many times. But there is another tip that goes far beyond this. And we haven't talked about brushes much. And that could be not its own video, but its own series of videos. There's so much to cover in brushes. So unfortunately we don't have the time for that. So either press B or click your brush. And right now you can see that if I were to draw with this, I'm drawing with it. And it's going to continue the way it is. It has its brush properties being told to, or telling your brush to perform this way. So I'm going to undo that. I'm going to go up here to my side tools. Now your particular program might be different. I really can't speak for it, but you can find your brush properties, I'm sure, with a quick Google search in your program. So I'm going to go up here to brushes. I'm going to expand this. Now, right off the bat, uncheck shape dynamics and smoothing, and I'm going to keep my brush size the way I have it, but right here it's giving you a preview of what we have here. So I could set my diameter up here, which is my brush size, or I can decrease it there, I can decrease it here, or I can pick a brush from the various brushes that it has. So all I want to do is I want to create a single row of rivets. So right now I want to deal with the spacing. And right now it's going to do that. The way it's set, it's going to go ahead and give me this straight line as we see in the preview. But if I increase the spacing and keep going, I can alter that behavior. Or if I go even further, let's actually type in 500. Alright, and let's click now. Oh, well, look at that. Now we're starting to get somewhere. Alright, 500 is probably a little too much for these, so let's come down. Let's try it. And up a little bit. And that's closer. But you see what I'm getting at. Without having to worry about clicking each one over and copying and pasting and all that stuff, we can just start painting like this. So I'm going to go ahead and move this back to its spot here. And I'm going to go ahead and clean out this whole thing with my eraser here real quick. Just kill all it. Go back to my brush tool and zoom into 100%. Now before we learned, if we click somewhere, a single spot, and then come over and hold down Shift, it's going to match up the straight line. But it's only doing a straight line from where we click. So if we're tracing, this is fine. We can go ahead and click and go over to the very end of the fuselage, find that other rivet, hold down Shift, and click. So that way we can follow the exact line of the rivets. Alright, but now let's say that we want to paint in a straight line. Well, and we don't have guides. To do that, you would click your starting point, and while you're holding down the left mouse button, hold Shift or press Shift and hold it. And now paint. And now you can see no matter where I move my cursor, it's going to continue this straight line. Okay? So keep that in mind. That will definitely come in handy, and there is that difference there from clicking and then shift clicking versus click, hold, shift, and move. And again, to listen to me talk about this is so much more complex or complicated for you to retain the information. Open Photoshop and actually practice. And you're going to learn this in no time. So click, shift, and drag. Alright, now let's go ahead and Control-Tab back over to our fuselage here. And I'm going to create a new layer here. And I'm just going to go ahead and work on our sizes here. Now I'm going to drop down to a number 2 brush. Actually, I'll just type it right in here, 2, and then get out of that. And again, I'm going with the number 2 brush because that's the size that I want. And I'm going to click up here, hold down Shift, and move over. And I can see right off the bat that that's spacing's terrible. So I'm going to go back into my brushes, and I'm going to go with like 500 here. Bring that back in, and let's see now. Click, hold on Shift, and there we go. Now these aren't perfect, but I can definitely work with these. These are definitely something that I would want to do. So now I'm going to zoom way back out here, and I can even go to where I can see the whole fuselage. So let's say 16%. Is that good? A little more, 12. Now here I can't really see it that much, and we have a little bit of curve going on here, so that's not going to help either. I can click anywhere I want, move this later. I'm going to just go ahead and click, hold down Shift, and then I'm going to drag way out here without worrying about where my cursor is. Let go. And now I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here, and now I'm going to grab that line, actually clean up some of this other junk here so we can see just it. And now I can move this wherever I want. I have it, and it's forever there. And nudge it into position. And there we go. Now, using all the other tips that we talked about, you should be able to pump out your rivets in no time. And again, having these rivets the way that they are, you're going to see huge benefits to this later. I'm going to copy these effects to it. And again, we're not seeing them at all on our original rivets. Our originals down here, we're not seeing anything there. But when we drag them to our new layer, our freshly created rivets, now we see the effect. And we can play with these effects later on. So hopefully that really got your gears turning and you're really going to see the benefit in doing this. I can't really give you much more tips than that. A lot of this is going to be your own legwork. But I will tell you, in creating your own rows or your own layers for individuals is very important. Keep them trim. By that I mean, keep your layers down to a minimum so you're not overwhelmed later trying to find stuff. It's like a work site. You're trying to build a house and your tools are all over the place, your ladder, your extension cords. You're going to lose productivity and sanity. So keep everything organized as you go and take breaks and all that good stuff. I want to go ahead and actually turn on my effects to each one so you can get a good idea of what these look like. Whoops. So there's so much I can do with these later, especially when we get into the next tutorial, which we'll be talking about wear and tear. If you do not do this step, then your wear and tear is not going to look as good as my wear and tear. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and go back to windowed mode for a minute here, and I'm going to zoom out here to say 8. And I'm going to go into here and I'm going to say match zoom. And just for myself, and since I'm doing my own rivets and layers, if you're not, then yours are going to look a little different than my paint from here on out. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that layer. I'm going to delete this layer. And I'm going to delete that layer. And I'm going to kill these effects by dragging the effects into the trash can. And now they're back to square one. Now I'm going to go ahead and drag my layer group, my rivet and line group. I'm going to drag that into here, and holding shift, my lines are now in there and I can play with them as much as I want. Going into full screen mode, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to shut them effects off. I don't want them effects on there for now. I just want the actual dots. And when I flatten my paint even, I'm going to most likely leave those off and probably even turn down the fill a little bit. The fill color is a little too much for me. I'm going to say 21%, copy this, and then do the same thing for all of these. Now there's some things you can't do. You might be able to do it with other versions of Photoshop, but if I had multiple ones selected, it doesn't give you the option to change them, which is a shame. Because Adobe's other products like After Effects, you can, set multiple at the same time, or even an entire group. But what can you do? So sorry if that tutorial was a little out there or a little back and forth. Wasn't my intention to do that. There's so many things I just want to show you, and there's so many tips that I want to show you to save time, and there's just not enough time to throw all those into one particular video. I will try to do my best and show you everything that I know that will help you save time in your paints. And again, please create new images from scratch. You're going to be able to follow along much better if you get a better understanding of that tool. And the only way to do that is to practice on your own. Alright, so I will see you in the next tutorial where we will start doing some wear and tear to the aircraft. And pretty much that's it. See you then.